Hello, everybody. Welcome to my talk, Programs That Create Other Programs, a Beginner's Guide Using D. I know we're kind of at the end of DConf Online, so I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I do want to give a heads up, a preview of my only 15-part workshop. Don't worry, it's only 15 parts. It's as small as I could get it. But also kind of talk through why do things like this. What value does it have both for the beginner and for us using D? What lessons can we learn from my experiences? And so let's talk about those things. So very quick about me. I know lots of you probably already know me. I did speak at DConf Online last year. So last year you might remember that I talked about my experiences porting all the different D compilers to OpenBSD, and then finally taking the reins of effectively being the maintainer for the OpenBSD official D-Lang packages, which I'm still happily doing today. I plug away every time I see an update come by on the forums. So I've been a long-time OpenBSD developer. I'm also a professor at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in the Information Technology and Web Science program. I'm also just a general D advocate. I'm also going to say I'm also a garbage collector advocate. Please feel free to let me know how wrong I am in the comments to this video. Perfectly okay. I did also want to update zlib in Phobos. That was cool. I think I have to do that again because I think there's been another update to zlib in the interim. And I really enjoy retro computing. So one of the things that I first did after I had completed the work in getting all of the D compilers, right, DMD, GDC, and LDC into OpenBSD, is say to myself, okay, so I have this new language that I actually quite like a whole lot. Let's do something where I am challenging myself not just to create an interesting and complex program, because I think we all can create for ourselves complex and interesting programs if only we have the time to do so, or I guess the salary to do so for those lucky few. But I really wanted to challenge myself to figure out exactly what D had to offer, but do so in a way that perhaps was not completely approachable to the true beginner, but would not require someone who has years and years and years of experience in programming to actually begin to understand what we're doing and to begin to kind of make the computer feel a little bit more real, I guess you could say. So for me, growing up as a child of the 80s and 90s, I was surrounded by 8-bit CPUs like the 6502, the Z80, as I'm sure many of us were if we grew up in those times. And I really do have an affinity for the Z80 CPU, right? I think back to the original Game Boy that I had, which had a clone offshoot of the Z80. I know it wasn't exactly a Z80, but close enough to a Z80. And I really just wanted to write a quick assembler for myself for the Z80, kind of as a way to test and really see what is out there in D, and share it with the community so that I could get feedback on the things that I was missing, right? Because an assembler is at least, it's easy enough for those of us who have a little bit of experience to kind of knock out in a day or two, but complex enough that there are many different ways to solve the challenges of taking assembly code and turning it into executable code, that I'm sure there would be more powerful aspects to D that I would have missed, that other people in reviewing my code and taking a look at what I did would have been able to spot and would have been able to say, hey, that's a really neat thing you did, but have you considered looking into this feature of D and what that can do for you? And that can shave, in one case, shaved off hundreds of lines of code. So much thank you there. But just kind of other things to explore as D was still new to me and I was still trying to figure out what exactly it offered. It turns out this series of blog posts was way more popular than I had anticipated them being. I figured I would write it, I'd show it to the D community, I'd get feedback, I'd learn how to do D better, and I'd go about my merry way, and that would be that. But I actually got many responses from people all over the world, really kind of asking me to turn that written blog post form into video form. Right? We all learn differently, right? Some people learn better with text. Some people work better with video. So I figured, why not? Let's go for it. Let's make it happen. And DConf Online is just a perfect venue, as I've since learned, having done it last year, to really kind of try these more experimental things. And so I hope the workshop ends up being worthwhile to everybody. But as we're kind of thinking through and watching the videos, my goal with them, right, is not to teach complex CS theory, right? In fact, I kind of pitched this as a no theory or low theory approach to building an assembler. And that was for a very specific reason. So reason number one was that's the way I had done it in my blog posts. And that's what was being asked of me from others, right? Could you do this in the same kind of general format, but with video instead of text, which makes a lot of sense to me, perfectly fine. So there was that. There was also the interesting issue of I chose to rewrite the assembler for the workshop from the one I had done in the blog post, just so people who had read the blog post would get something different. And so I wanted to make sure to stay true to that as well, even as I was writing this newer version of the assembler. And I also think it's the case that while I would never say that you should not learn your CS theory, because obviously you should, it is good for you, I also find that in my experience, there are lots of people, even students that I've had who have gone through courses like compiler construction courses, still kind of look at the compilers and assemblers and all that stuff as kind of a black box of magic. And while it might be true that some of our compilers do lots of heavy lifting and do lots of complex things, the decompiler certainly being an example of that, the actual understanding of how you go from source code to executable code doesn't need to start with complex multi-paradigm compiler. It can start with how do we take a very simple language like assembly and really just do basic pattern matching. And as a result of that basic pattern matching, spit out the correct sequence of bytes that match the intent of the assembly code that the author wrote. And that doesn't really require much, if any, complex CS theory or CS knowledge. And in fact, D kind of helps even smooth over a lot of the places that might be seen as difficult, that might be seen as theoretical, right? As you'll see when we go through the workshop, when it came to the symbol table, for example, I didn't even bother writing lists. I just said, hey, in D, you have arrays that can be dynamic, that you can append stuff to. So I'll just append every symbol to the array and just build the array as I go on. No need to bother with lists, no need to bother with hash tables. Just here's an array of all my symbols, perfectly good. Good enough for our goals. Because again, right, the idea isn't you need to understand all this complex stuff to understand how symbols are being held and used. Just can we see how symbols might be held and used? Can we see how symbols can be dealt with in maybe its most simple form to solve the problems that we have at hand, where the problem really is just, can we demystify these programs that build other programs? That was really all of my goal. Because again, I think there are lots of people who do think of these things as black boxes, and you really don't need to think of them as black boxes. And so we can help people see that it's just an interesting sequence of problems. You can break those sequences of problems down into smaller problems. You can attack those smaller problems with the knowledge that you already have, and maybe grow a little as you begin to explore other ways of solving these problems. And at the end of the day, come away with a real complex program, and a real complex program that you could explain to somebody else, even if you are still new to programming. And I think that's really, really helpful, both in the kind of building up confidence in those who are new to computers and programming, but also really kind of demonstrating the fact that these things aren't special. They're just an interesting sequence of problems that can be broken down into smaller problems, and that you have the skill set to tackle and to solve and to put all together into one bigger, more interesting piece of software. All that because I wrote some blog posts. Now there's some other things in the D language that I also take advantage of. So for example, you'll see I take the exact same approach that I think the decompiler does, in which I just create new objects, and I never bother to destroy them. I never bother to free anything, because the garbage collector is going to do its job. And you will not be able to convince me that the garbage collector is not a good thing. Again, I'll take all comments in the comments below, but why not? If I don't have to spend the time worrying about manual memory management, then I could spend that time simplifying the architecture of our assembler to help shepherd people who are new to the fold into building confidence that they can solve difficult problems. And then later on, if we want to say to them, hey, you can do manual memory management, but then you have to do all these other things because you don't have a garbage collector, or we want to say there are all other ways to implement a garbage collector that might be more performant or efficient or whatever compared to the one that's in the D library, and we encourage them to write that newer, more efficient, better garbage collector, then so be it. But walking before you can run is important. So my hope is that this workshop is challenging enough for newcomers to walk away with some new knowledge. I also hope it's explained in a way that people who maybe do teach computer science for a living or do mentor students, to give them new ways to think about breaking down and solving complex problems. Now, I know a lot of us already know that that is, a common strategy for solving any complex problem, right? Break it down into its smaller parts and tackle those smaller parts. But maybe the way I go about doing that is a little differently than the way you would go about doing that. And maybe that gives you some ideas of how you can kind of change up your work in breaking down those problems for your students or for those people that you mentor. And then, like I said, I kind of want to inspire the new generation to know that they can solve these problems. These programs are not black boxes, that you can do it. And even if you write a small one, even if you write a super inefficient one, kind of one of the inefficiencies that I point out in the workshop is, so while we will make a 2-pass assembler, I don't do any work whatsoever in saving really any of the results, any of the tokenization of my first pass. Because my thought process is, if I can successfully tokenize the first pass, then I can successfully tokenize the second pass. And it's going to be more work to save all those tokens than it is to just say, all right, parse it all again. And when you parse it the second time, then we'll do a second set of interesting things to them. Again, is it going to win any awards? No, other than maybe length of time it took me to write all this. It's definitely not going to win any beauty awards, definitely not going to win any efficiency awards, but it will win correctness awards, right? It will take your 8080 source code, 8080 assembly code, and turn it into the actual sequence of bytes that you intended it to be. And if over time, right, students or who's ever learning from this workshop learn from it, they kind of see where the inefficiencies lie, maybe that's the push that they need to go ahead and actually implement a better version of this assembler. Right? This assembler is not designed to be the be-all and end-all. It's designed to be a starting point to help us think about solving these complex challenges, demonstrating that these programs are not the mystery, magic, black boxes that a lot of people think they are, and how we can go about using D to demonstrate its strengths to solve very complex problems. And hopefully bring others into the D fold, right? Hopefully people will watch this workshop, see the power that does lie in the D language, and then take it forward themselves into other problems that they end up coding solutions for. So things that I've learned, one thing that didn't surprise me all too much, but is always worth being said, is that people do enjoy being challenged, right? There is this idea that, you can challenge them too much and just cause panic, but people do genuinely enjoy being challenged. And I think one of the things that we need to task ourselves with doing better as a community is finding ways to promote D as the tool through which they can solve those challenges that they enjoy, right? I know every year, right, with Advent of Code, I'm sure there are people doing Advent of Code in D, but why wait every year until December to do that? Why not find ways to challenge people every day with D as a tool to help solve those problems? I think that's worth thinking about and trying to come to terms with and grapple with and figure out how to make those worthwhile challenges be more available and show how D is the tool to solve those challenges. This one I don't think is too much of a surprise. I think D needs more advocacy. I did have a student, so those of you on the forums might have remembered somebody coming along with a program called Trash D, which was an implementation of the free desktop recycling bin. I hate to break it, but he was actually one of my students, and he had read my blog posts, and he saw that I was interested in D and that I was advocating for D, and he figured he should give it a try himself, and he did. And he went on to develop what I think is a really interesting tool. Finding more ways to make that happen on a more regular basis is something that I think we need to think about doing and doing well, which might be as easy as just showing people the projects that you've written that are in D, right? I did not necessarily intend for my assembler, that series of blog posts, to become popular, but I did intend to show people my projects in D. And it turns out when you do that, people are not only interested in the topic, but they're interested in the tools you've used for your solution. So I'm sure there are people out there who read that blog post and may even be using D now as a result of that. And of course, that means writing projects in D. I'm as guilty as this as I'm sure everyone is. I don't write everything in D, but I try to make sure that I don't forget my decoding abilities. And I do make sure that I at least code a couple things every year in D. Or even use D as part of a larger project, right? I mean, we all know that one of the big strengths of D is its interoperability between C and C++. So you don't have to use D everywhere. Use it somewhere and show someone. And I know enterprise people are going to say, but we have to use language X, Y, and Z, and that's fine. But in other projects where you don't have those constraints, think about how you can introduce D into a larger project, right? D is plenty cross-platform at this point, right? Windows, Mac, Linux, the BSDs, at least OpenBSD, Solaris, I think. It's probably portable to others, so people who might not be using one of those operating systems I just rattled off and are interested in porting D, I have a little bit of experience with that. Definitely reach out to me so that we can make D more cross-platform and really be able to justify more and more why it is we should be using D either as the language for larger projects or at least a part of a larger project. So as for what's next for me, hopefully I'm hoping you all enjoy the workshop. I'm hoping that this can be the first of many workshops, even if I'm not the one doing that workshop. I would love for every annual DConf Online event to have a significant workshop at the end like this, where participants walk away with a usable program in D. And they get walked through how to build that actual usable program from scratch. You know, maybe next year it's, I don't know, a text editor. Maybe the year after that it's a compiler for a small language. Maybe a compiler for a language that will go on to use this assembler as its assembler, right? So there's lots of interesting things that can be done, but it will build our corpus of interesting real-world problems and walkthroughs of how to solve those problems in D that can just kind of live on in perpetuity on YouTube, on, you know, whatever is going to be the new video sharing platform in the decades to come. What else is next for me is using D in more research. So I have a couple of research projects in the works with my students that will be using D as part of our solutions for those problems. Also, D as research, right? It's not just enough to say D is going to be a tool that we're going to use to solve research problems, but to kind of turn the lens and say, what if D is our research problem? And I think that will also help, right, with the advocacy of D as well. Right? Think of all the different places where we may not be talking about D as much that we certainly could use more discussion of it in. And then lastly, just thinking about how the next generation, how we can make them as excited about D as I think a lot of us are who were here at this conference, right? I think we're all here because this is something that we value. This is something that we want to see succeed. I know I certainly want to see D succeed. And thinking about how we bring new people into the fold, I think is important. So with that, like I said, I did not want to take up my full 40 minutes of time. What I'd like to say to you all now is onwards to the workshop. I'd like to say thank you all for listening. I hope everybody enjoyed DConf Online 2022. And if you have any questions or comments or thoughts for me about the workshop, reach out to me on the forums, email me. You should all know my email by now. It's on the first slide. And talk to me. I'm very interested in seeing how D can be leveraged as a platform and a tool to inspire the next generation of programmers. And that's the thing I want to work on going forward. So thank you again for listening and enjoy the workshop.